JK. So, today I wanted to talk about chapter tactics, but not the chapter tactics that you normally see in the Space Marine Codex. The chapter tactics you can sort of combine and customize to make your own army. Are they better or worse than the standard chapter tactics of, say, the Ultramarines, Iron Hands, Salamanders? No, not necessarily. Some of them, it really depends on your playstyle, just like the regular chapter tactics. I mentioned this in my previous video. Things like, again, Ultramarines or Imperial Fists, they're great depending on what you're playing, so they can all be very good. And the same goes for what are called successor chapter tactics. So on page 176 and 77, there are a variety of tactics to choose from, and you can combine two to make your own style, your own combat style for your chapter. So I'm going to go through a few of them right now. In fact, I'm going to go through all of them, and I'm going to see, which ones are the strongest, which ones make good combinations, how they can be combined with other things. And you'll see there's a lot to choose from here, and there's not really a lot that's necessarily bad. So the idea is that if you don't choose one of the standard chapter tactics like Ultramarines, Salamanders, Imperial Fists, Iron Hands, White Scars, Black Templars, Raven Guard, or Crimson Fists, you don't choose any of those, you can choose successor chapter tactics. Now, if you choose successor chapter tactics for, say, an army that you want to basically be Iron Hands, for example, you can do that too. So you can take a chapter and say, this is a successor to the Iron Hands. I'll be using Iron Hands chapter tactics, but these are my, this is my army, say the, I don't know, whatever you want to call your army. So you can still do that. It's called Inheritors of the Primarch. It basically allows you to select one of the standard chapter tactics for yourself without exactly playing that chapter. Keep in mind, though, that Inheritors of the Primarch cannot be combined with any other chapter tactics. So you can't just take that and then take another thing. But with the other ones, you can pretty much combine all of them. So first we have one called Bolter Fusillades. When resolving an attack made with a bolt weapon by a model with this tactic, re-roll a hit roll of 1. So this is very good, but it's also going to cause some games to slow down. So it specifically states by a model. So each model gets a re-roll, but each model can re-roll a hit roll of 1. So you're going to have to roll each model individually, and each model will get 1 reroll of 1s. They don't reroll all 1s. So this could be a little confusing, but it's a very strong tactic, especially considering you can just combine it with another one as well. So you'll reroll a hit roll of 1 each time a model fires a bolt weapon, which is pretty solid. It means you don't necessarily have to have captains around you all the time to reroll 1s, and it makes your bolt weapons a bit stronger. Next is called Born Heroes. This one is for characters only. Character units with this tactic can perform a heroic intervention if they're enemy units within 6 inches instead of 3. Normally it's done at 3 inches. Characters can swoop in and attack. Now it's 6 inches. And they can move up to 6 inches when doing so. So that's it. So they have the ability to intervene heroically at 6 inches instead of 3. This is only for characters, though, so this is not your regular units, probably because characters are the only ones who can perform heroic interventions. So if you're playing more of a melee sort of support style army where you have a lot of character units supporting your troops, you can use this to great use. They can swoop in and attack, and combined with some of the other tactics and warlord traits and stuff like that, you can make a really mean melee army. There are a lot of with some of the new Marine rules, the general rule, which basically gives all Marines an extra attack on the charge, after being charged or heroically intervening, you can combine some tactics to make a really strong melee army that isn't necessarily Blood Angels, for example, or Space Wolves. Next is Duelists. When resolving an attack made with a melee weapon, here's another melee-centered one. When resolving an attack made with a melee weapon by a model with this tactic against an infantry or biker unit, an unmodified hit roll of 6 automatically scores a hit and successfully wounds the target. So, unmodified 6s. That means that if you have something that adds 1 to the hit rolls, 5s and 6s are not going to get you extra hits. Only 6s. So unmodified. No matter what modifiers are applied, 6s will automatically hit and they'll automatically wound in melee. That's quite good. So you don't have to make a wound roll. It says it here, even in brackets, do not make a wound roll. So you automatically wound the target. But it's only against infantry and bikers. So bikers, I mean, everything from jet bikers to regular bikers to all other infantry, which is a lot of units in the game. So you'll be hard pressed to come up against an army that has no infantry whatsoever. It happens, but it's not common. So this again is a good thing for melee centered armies. Now it does say specifically duelists, this tactic. You cannot select this tactic if you have already selected the Whirlwind of Rage tactic. That's another one we'll get to later. Essentially, duelists and Whirlwind of Rage, Whirlwind of Rage cannot be combined. So it says the same thing under Whirlwind of Rage. You can't combine the two because it seems a little gamey with how things work in terms of hit rolls of 6. Anyhow, next one. Fearsome Aspect. Subtract 1 from the leadership characteristic of enemy units while they are within 3 inches of any units from your army with this tactic. From everything I've checked, this does not, there's nothing that says this doesn't stack with other leadership hindering abilities. So for example, Reavers who already have this, it would be a -2 for Reavers with this tactic. So that would make them specifically more dangerous to be around. And there's also a Warlord trait which subtracts 1 from leadership of the Warlord as well, which normally on its own isn't really a great Warlord trait, but if you combine it and you can get -2 leadership to things around you, that could be fantastic. It could really, really cause some problems for certain armies that depend heavily on infantry, or even stuff that normally has high leadership, so players don't necessarily account for it. Say like Necrons, they all have super high leadership, but if you have a brick of 20 Necron warriors, and suddenly their leadership, instead of being 10, is 8 because of some combination, and they lose a few, that's going to cause problems for them. Next, Hungry for Battle. When a unit with this tactic advances or makes a charge move, add 1 to the advance roll or charge roll. Speed. It's very good. Again, combine this with another melee style tactic, or not even melee, if you want to advance stuff farther up the board. It's great. It works well also if you're running things like rhinos that you want to get them into combat, just to block stuff. It works very well with that too. So a great little bonus. Anything that advances or charges, you just add 1 inch to it. Perfect. Indomitable. When a morale test is taken for a unit with this tactic, no more than 1 model can flee. I find this one kind of weak. Space Marines already have high leadership, and they also get to re-roll failed leadership tests, or any leadership tests for that matter. So this one I find kind of the one, it's okay, I guess. It does help that you get to combine it with something else, but it's all right. If you're running like big squads of things, for example, maybe. But I would avoid this one, honestly. Now, just going back quickly, Hungry for Battle, the one that adds 1 to the advance or charge roll. I said it adds 1 inch. I was wrong. It adds 1, just the number 1, to the advance roll or charge roll. So if, for example, you have something that will double the advance or boost the charge, it affects this 1. So let's say you have some way of doubling someone's advance move. You roll a 3, you add 1 to that, it becomes 4. You then double that 4. So it's not simply adding 1 inch to it, it's adding it, and then anything that would multiply that or add to that adds further. Inheritors of the Primarch, we talked about this. This is one where you can take one of the regular chapters, like the Ultramarines, for example, and just have that as your chapter tactics for your own custom chapter, or a successor chapter of your choosing. Nova Marines, for example. Knowledge is power. When a psychic test or deny the witch test is taken for a psyker model with this tactic, re-roll any or all dice rolls of 1. That's really useful if you want to use librarians. And deny the witch is really helpful. Librarians are good psychers overall. They're not great, but they're not crappy. So if you were to run a bunch of psychers in a Space Marine army, it would be okay. But if you had this tactic, it would make them quite strong. Rerolling 1s, it blocks perils, and you have more of a chance of blocking spells. I would say definitely you'd want to take more than 1 librarian if you're taking this tactic. I would take at least 2 if you're focusing on that. But it's a very, very solid tactic, especially considering librarians have a psychic hood, which adds 1 to their deny the witch within 12 inches. So it's a further boost to their abilities. Long range marksman. This one's one of my favorites just because it's an all-rounder and it works with everything. Add 3 inches to the range characteristic of ranged weapons with this tactic. Ranged weapons model. Whoa, what? Add 3 inches to the range characteristic of ranged weapons models with this tactic. Models with this tactic. Sorry, I couldn't get through that. Basically, add 3 inches to all the guns. That's it. That's simple. And that includes things like flamers, too. So suddenly flamers have an 11-inch range, which is really cool. Or the Flamestorm cannon. So I didn't notice this until later because there are a couple of subtle little profile changes for weapons and units, but the Flamestorm cannon for the Land Raider Redeemer, which is the huge flamer that's on the side, used to be 8 inches, and now it's 12. So it's a 12-inch flamer that is strength 6, minus 2 AP, 2 damage each time. And not only that, it's a 12-inch flamer. If you add 3 inches, that's 15 inches of flamer. Fantastic. But of course, other things too. So 48 inches for a las cannon is now 51. Bolters, regular bolters are 27-inch range now. So that one's a really, really good one. It gives you that extra little bit of range, but also on things you didn't really expect to, when you think of this, it's called long-range marksman. You think of things like las cannons or missile launchers, things that are long range, but it really benefits short-range stuff too. So if we're talking about a melt-a-gun now inside 15 can hit something, and half of 15, so 7.5, if you're under 7.5 inches, you're in melta range now instead of just 6 inches. So that's good to notice too. And then also, as I get to these other tactics, some of them are a piece of one of the standard chapter tactics that you can choose. So this one, Master Artisans, is basically part of the Salamander's chapter tactics. When a unit with this tactic fires Overwatch or is chosen to shoot or fight with, you can re-roll a single hit roll and re-roll a single wound roll. So it's the same as part of the Salamander's chapter tactics. And there are a few of these. Stoic, for example. Add 1 to the leadership characteristic of models with this tactic. That's part of the Ultramarines chapter tactics. So if you like part of it, there are a few where you can choose a chunk. Another one is Stealthy, which is part of Raven Guard. When resolving an attack made with a ranged weapon against a unit with this tactic by a model that is more than 12 inches away, the unit is treated as having the benefit of cover to its saving throw. So I played a game where I used Master Artisans, so the re-roll of 1 hit and 1 wound roll anytime they shoot or fight, and the Stealthy having cover outside of 12 inches. And it was really a great combination. My opponent had first turn, and I got extra armor to kind of compensate for that, and then my he killed a couple of units, but what I had remaining was more reliable with rerolling one hit and rerolling one wound. So you can make some pretty cool combinations here. Preferred enemies. This one leads me to a certain space. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. So when you select this tactic, select one of the following faction keywords. Tyranids, Eldari, Eldar, Orcs, Heretic Astartes, Chaos Space Marines, Necrons, Tau Empire. So you can't select anything Imperium, if you've noticed. When resolving an attack made with a melee weapon by a model with this tactic against a unit with the faction keyword in a turn which the model made a charge, was charged, or performed a heroic intervention. Maybe you're seeing a theme here, because charging, being charged, performing a heroic intervention, a lot of rules now circle around that. So you can re-roll the hit roll. So whenever you charge, perform a heroic intervention, or are charged, whenever you resolve an attack, so every attack, you can re-roll to hit against it in melee. So this thing, see, it's specific for Tyranids, Necrons, Eldar, Heretic Astartes. You pick one. You don't get all of them. You pick one of them. This is one of those ones that leads me to believe some Space Marine players will look at their opponent's army and then be like, okay, so these are the tactics I'm using now, which seems a little shitty because it seems a little like tailoring to your opponent. Now, I know some people do this and some people agree that it's okay and that's fine, but it seems a little... It's riding that edge, you know what I mean? So suddenly, like, you're playing against Necrons. Okay, I basically have preferred enemy against Necrons, which means in melee, I reroll all my hits against you. Which is like, kind of rough. Especially considering all other armies don't really get to do this. I mean, all other armies could, say, choose their equivalent of chapter tactics before the game starts. And if you guys agree, then do whatever you want, right? I mean, the rules are yours to mess around with. But when it comes to like, I don't know, when it comes to like playing new players or like friendly games, this feels kind of shitty to do. I mean, you could choose your own chapter and have them like hate Tau because you hate Tau or something, you know, like have fun with it. And like, yeah, you end up fighting orcs, so it doesn't come into play. But it's part of the identity of your army. That's a different thing entirely. But again, whatever you and your opponent agree to is, well, it's fair game, right? Who's going to stop you? Rapid assault. Models with this tactic do not suffer the penalty for advancing and firing assault weapons. Situational to assault weapons, but if you like to move up quickly, I mean, hey, you could do this one, advance and fire assault weapons with no penalty, plus add one to advance and charge rolls, and you'd have an ultra fast army with crazy assault weapons. Like you could go like flamers, melt-a-guns, and like all sorts of different assault bolters or things like that. And you'd have some really cool combinations. So again, none of these are really bad, minus a couple of the leadership ones, which I don't. Space Marine leadership's already good, in my opinion, anyways. But you could really get away with like stacking leadership abilities, like having +1 to leadership, and then, you know, only one will ever flee from leadership, and then doing maximum squads like that, if you like, I guess. Next, Scions of the Forge. So this one is a piece of the Iron Hands chapter tactics. Models with this tactic that have a damage table are considered to have double the number of wounds remaining for the purposes of determining what row to use on the damage table. So that is specific to 10 wounds or more in terms of model size. So it doesn't affect your troops. It doesn't affect any of your Space Marines themselves. It affects your vehicles, basically. It can be very, very useful because it means when you have a degrading profile, like it goes down based on the number of wounds remaining, then you count it as double. I'll give you an example for that because that one's a little tricky to understand. I think I did explain it in the other chapter tactics video when talking about the Iron Hands, but I want to go over it again. So let's take, for example, a Land Raider. A Land Raider has a damage profile because it's got 16 wounds. So it's got more than 10, so it has a degrading profile. So between 9 and 16 wounds, it has movement 10, ballistic skill 3+, and attack 6. So the movement, the ballistic skill, and the attacks will go down when it has fewer than 9 wounds. Between 5 and 8 wounds, it instead moves 5 inches, not 10. So it's to represent it getting damaged. The ballistic skill is 4+, not 3+, and it has d6 attacks instead of just 6 attacks. So that's one of the examples. And then there's the lowest profile, 1 to 4 wounds, 3-inch move, 5+ ballistic skill, 1 attack. So what the chapter tactic does is it counts your wounds as double. You don't get double wounds. That's not what happens. You count the wounds as double for the purposes of this table. Let's say you have a Land Raider and it has 5 wounds left. That would put you in that middle bracket where you have 5-inch movement, 4+ ballistic skill, and d6 damage. You're damaged. It's hurting. You know, the tracks have come off a bit. It moves slower. The ballistics are down, whatever. Since you have 5 wounds left, you're right in the middle. But with the tactic, it counts as having 10 wounds. So you're in the top bracket. You don't have 10 wounds. You count as having 10 wounds for the purposes of the table and this tactic. Then we have Stalwart. This one's one of my favorites, especially if you're planning on running a lot of Space Marine infantry or low toughness models. When resolving an attack made against a unit with this tactic, an unmodified, there's that word again, wound roll of 1 or 2 always fails, irrespective of any abilities that the weapon or the model making the attack may have. So there's a few things here to notice. 1, ones are normally always a fail to wound, no matter what. Even with modifications, ones never wound. 2s, though, 2s do wound sometimes if something is double the strength of the target's toughness. So, for example, if I've got a Marine right here. He's toughness 4. So let's say someone shoots a missile at him, which is strength 8. 8 is double 4, so it would wound him on a 2. But with Stalwart, a 2 would still fail. Now, it says unmodified. So if someone has an ability to modify wound rolls, say a +1 to wound, then Stalwart doesn't come into effect for the 2s, unfortunately. Stealthy, I already talked about. Stoic as well. Tactical withdrawal. Units with this tactic can charge in a turn in which they fell back. That could be very, very useful. I see it as situational, but melee armies could have a lot of fun with this, especially considering you get bonuses on the charge. You get that extra attack on the charge, and you could slot in one of the other chapter tactics and potentially warlord traits that could stack and add different bonuses when you charge. So you could fight, fall out of combat, jump back in and fight again, and get those bonuses once more. Warded. I really like this one too. A model with this tactic would lose a wound as a result of a mortal wound. Roll a d6. On a 5+, the wound is not lost. That's really good. So that is sort of to represent that they're blocking psychic powers, I'm guessing, called warded. Because it does block mortal wounds, so it'll block a lot of things like smite or other psychic powers that deal mortal wounds. But it also just blocks mortal wounds in general, so it's not specifically psychic powers. Vehicles exploding, for example. It'll block that on a 5-up. That's really good. It's very, very, very good. It's just all mortal wounds. Anything like sniper weapons that deal mortal wounds in addition. There are tons of other weapons. Those can be blocked on a 5+. So that's really, really a good one, especially considering you can take that and combine it with something else. If you took that and say like Stalwart together, where 1s or 2s unmodified always fail to wound, you would have some tough Marines. And then we get to Whirlwind of Rage, which I mentioned can never be combined with duelists. So Whirlwind of Rage, when resolving an attack made with a melee weapon by a model with this tactic, in a turn in which the model's unit made its charge, was charged, or performed a heroic intervention, the magical 3 again, the holy trinity of getting extra attacks. An unmodified hit roll of 6 scores an additional hit. So, this is why they can't combine, because 6s are crazy. If you could combine Duelists and Whirlwind of Rage, unmodified hits would score an additional hit and automatically wound. That'd be nuts. And that just adds to a whole crazy level of gaminess. At least they saw that. So yes, basically any unmodified hit rolls of 6 score an additional hit in a turn in which someone was charged, or performed a heroic intervention. So again, melee strong, a good melee ability that you can add. Say like if you took Whirlwind of Rage and then Hungry for Battle, you would get guys who would add 1 to advance, 1 to charge, and when they are charged, or perform heroic interventions, hit rolls of 6, unmodified hit rolls of 6, score a bonus hit. You don't roll for that, by the way. So you score at 6, it's 2 hits that you get. Very, very cool. So you can make all sorts of cool combinations with these. You can stack a couple things to make them, like, say, really focused in one area, like 2 melee abilities, and you want them to be really strong in melee. Or you can pick a couple of things and make this sort of combo of, okay, this is really good and it's going to keep my Marines alive, and this will make them more reliable in close combat, for example, and just slap those two together. Or leadership buff and to hit rolls combined. Whatever you want, really, which is very cool. With the couple of exceptions they've mentioned, where like Whirlwind of Rage and Duelists, you can't combine it. Otherwise, these are all really cool. What I love most about this is not that they're all like super strong or crazy. They're strong. A lot of them are quite strong, but it really is that customization, which I'm gonna tip my hat to Games Workshop on that one, because I really like the fact that you can just combine things to make your own chapter. That's something I've been waiting for and waiting to do, and I know I'm gonna be messing around with these because there are a few like the standard tactics that are like, damn, these are good, and I really just should be using these because they're very powerful. Iron Hands comes to mind. But it just makes me want to toy with this and be like, okay, so what's the identity of this army that, is kind of stealthy and benefits from cover saves outside of 12 inches, but also has like long range weaponry, like something like that. You can have some really, really cool combinations, and it'll really allow you to customize your army and the identity of your army, which is really neat. Anyhow, let me know what you guys think. I want to know if anyone out there has tried out different combinations, what they like, what you've chosen for your army. Not just, is this good as a combination? Like, that's helpful. But, like, what did you do with your tactics to make your army, and, like, why did you choose those in terms of creativity? Why did you choose those to make it the identity of your army? Anyhow, let me know in the comments below. And thanks for watching.